Manchester, a bustling and lively city in the northwest of England. Home to Manchester United, Manchester City, and arguably the best music scene in the UK. Most people think that crime in Manchester is only limited to the gang violence of Moss Side or the horrific Moors murders. What they don't realise is that Manchester had another serial killer, Trevor Hardy. Trevor Joseph Hardy was born on the 11th of June 1945 in Manchester, UK. Not a whole lot is known about his early life, most likely because at the time of his trial, the Yorkshire Ripper case was still ongoing, and that garnered much larger media attention and focus. However, Hardy did mention in a letter to one of his victims' families, the Mossoffs, that this was all his parents' fault and that his upbringing was to blame for the issues that drove him to murder. In 1972, Hardy was 31 years old and arrested for the assault of a young man. He had attacked the man with a pickaxe and, fortunately, the man survived his injuries. The judge presiding over the case told Hardy, quote, "You are a menace to society," and how right he was. On November 18, 1974, aged 33, Hardy walked out of Albany Prison on the Isle of Wight, and thus a serial killer was born. His murderous plans and schemes began while he was in prison, with inmates confessing that Hardy had his heart set on revenge against two people in his life. The first was 41-year-old Stanley O'Brien, an ex-friend of Hardy's who he had thought had gone behind his back. The second was 14-year-old Beverly Driver, who was actually an ex-girlfriend of Hardy. Driver had actually only written to Hardy in prison because she felt sorry for him and wanted to offer him support and companionship. She only stopped writing to him when she found a boy her own age and when her family ultimately found out that she was writing to a 31-year-old prisoner. This made Hardy extremely angry. It seems that Hardy's plan to murder 41-year-old O'Brien would be halted right in its tracks, as O'Brien had died whilst Hardy was serving his sentence. Whilst this was much to the annoyance of Hardy, he soon came to the acceptance that O'Brien was dead either way, and that justice, at least in his mind, had been served. Next on Hardy's hit list was 14-year-old Beverly Driver, who had shunned him whilst he was serving time in Isle of Wight. Hardy made his way over to the Driver family home in Newton Heath on December 31st, 1974. He threw an axe through her window, either as a threat for what was to come, or in the hopes that it would hit her. Beverly was not home at the time of the attack, however, unfortunately, 15-year-old Leslie Jane Stewart was walking on the same estate on the way to her boyfriend's house. Hardy grabbed 15-year-old Stewart and stabbed her in the throat in a brutal and frenzied attack. Once he was finished, he threw her into a clay pit, as if she didn't matter. Hardy would frequently return to the crime scene, most likely to relive the crime, and he also cut her up and disposed of her body in other locations. Hardy disposed of her head in a lake in the hopes that without it, the rest of her remains would be unidentifiable and would not lead the police back to him. There is one mistake that Hardy made, however. He took a ring that she was wearing and gave this to another girl as a love token, a move that would ultimately link Hardy to the murder. Wanda Scala, who was 17 or 18 depending on the different sources that you read, different newspapers say that she was 17, some say that she was 18, was working part-time at the Lightbone Hotel as a barmaid. It was July 1975, and Wanda was walking back home from her job as usual when she was struck in the head with a brick. She was robbed and then strangled. Hardy had struck again. When her body was found at the building site, it had been revealed that she had been stripped of her clothing, mutilated, and sexually assaulted. The most shocking detail in Wanda's case is that her nipples were bitten off by Hardy post-mortem, before he dumped her at the building site. Hardy, like with Leslie Stewart, took a trophy from Wanda in the form of her blood-stained clothing and handbag. Hardy had bragged to his little brother about the murder of Wanda Scala, under the impression that his brother may betray him and inform the police. Hardy already had an alibi, in the form of his partner, Sheila Farrow. Regardless of his alibi, Hardy was arrested and taken into police custody and held whilst the investigation into his connection with the murder of Wanda Scala was underway. Farrow actually smuggled in a file for Hardy so that he was able to file down his teeth. Now, some say that they were filed into points, some say that they were filed down. I can't find sort of any confirmed report that confirms one way or the other. He did this so that the bite marks would never be able to match him. Following the investigation into him, Hardy was freed as he had a solid alibi and the police had little evidence of his involvement. It would only be 6 months before Hardy could resist his murderous urges once more. In 1976, Sharon Mosoff was a bright, intelligent 17-year-old who had just left Failsworth High and recently started working for a kitchen company in a mill close to her Failsworth home. In March of that year, Sharon was attending a works party in Farnworth, Manchester, and called her dad Ralph, asking him what bus she would be able to get from Piccadilly to their home in Failsworth. Ralph actually told Sharon that if she'd finished earlier, that him and his wife, and her mother, would have been able to come and pick her up, but however, it was past midnight, so they were unable to. Ralph told her what number bus to get and also told her that he would leave the door on the latch and 2 bottles behind the door so that they knew when Sharon was home safe. Sadly, this was the last time that Ralph spoke to his 17-year-old daughter Sharon. Those 2 reassuring bottle clinks behind the door never came for the Mosoff family. Sharon was making her way home in Failsworth when Hardy spotted her walking alone. At the time, Hardy was actually attempting to break into a local shopping centre, but he just couldn't pass up the opportunity that had presented itself in front of him. Hardy grabbed Sharon, strangled her before stripping her naked, and just like Wanda, one of her nipples had been bitten off by Hardy, which shows that he was slowly amping up and developing a ritual for himself during his killings. Once he was finished, Hardy dumped Sharon's body in the Rochdale canal and carried on with his night, as if nothing had ever happened. March 1976 was bitterly cold, and by the morning the Rochdale canal had frozen over, trapping Sharon's body on the top. A worker at the local dairy factory was the first to discover her body and quickly alerted Greater Manchester Police. This was when the Mosoff family's worst fears became reality. A large-scale manhunt soon ensued, with Greater Manchester Police leaving no stone unturned. The local media had dubbed the killer the Beast of Manchester, and understandably, the general public were in a frenzy. Greater Manchester Police stopped and searched over 23,000 people in the search for Hardy, as they were determined that his deeds would not go unpunished. As Hardy had been on the police's radar for the murder of Wanda Scala, they decided that it was time to catch up with him once more. Again, his partner Sheila Farrow gave him a solid but false alibi for the night of Sharon Mosoff's murder. All hope was not lost for Greater Manchester Police trying to catch their killer, as a few months later Hardy struck again. This time he attacked 21-year-old Christian Campbell. It is reported that Christian actually bit through her tongue in the ensuing chaos of escaping Hardy's grip. Thankfully, Christian escaped with her life and was able to provide the police with important information that put Hardy back onto their radar. Hardy was found to be hiding out in a house in Stockport in August of 1976, which is around 8 miles outside of Manchester city centre. It was here that police took him into custody to question him about the murder of Sharon Mosoff. Almost immediately, Hardy confessed to everything, including the murder of Leslie Stewart and the whereabouts of her remains. His confession was over 40 pages long. Hardy's trial was set to begin in the same year, 1976, during which he sacked his government-appointed legal counsel, or legal aid, in hopes of attempting to plead guilty to the charge of manslaughter and ultimately be given a lesser sentence for his guilt and cooperation. Hardy also lobbied for the charge to be dropped to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to him being insane. Luckily, the jury and Manchester Crown Court prosecution team saw through this defence put forth by Hardy and stated that he was not insane nor mentally abnormal and that he was fit to stand trial for the charges of murder brought against him. A court-ordered psychiatrist even testified at the trial that Hardy, quote, was hopelessly evil, dangerous, who could kill again. With this conclusion, the jury found Trevor Hardy guilty on 3 counts of murder with a minimum term of 30 years on May 2nd, 1978. Mr. Justice Caulfield was the one to sentence Hardy, and he had these words for him. "This area is a happy place, but it will be happier without you. You have been convicted of the horrible murders of 3 young girls, and you will go to prison for life." People watching in the public gallery shouted, "Come up here, you murdering bastard. Die, you bastard." Shortly after being sent to Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire, Hardy wrote a letter to the Mosoff family claiming that none of this was, quote, his fault, and that his murderous outbursts were the direct of his terrible and abusive upbringing. During his 30-year minimum term at Wakefield Prison, staff and other inmates had nothing but good things to say about the convicted serial killer, and even added that he had a good work record, proving that the most dangerous among us are also the most manipulative. On February 23, 2008, Hardy appeared before the court once more, as he had served his 30-year minimum term. Mr. Justice Terr rejected the plea for his sentence to be set at 30 years and allow Hardy to have a parole hearing. In fact, the Times newspaper actually reported that he had been given a whole life tariff and as one of only 40 prisoners in the UK to be handed this sentence. Only the Home Office has authorisation to actually grant a whole life tariff, which means that Hardy, along with other prisoners such as Rose West, Jonah Dennehy, the perpetrator of the Peterborough Ditch murders, and Stephen Griffiths, the crossbow cannibal. Those criminals listed above will never ever be eligible for parole and will ultimately serve their whole sentence behind bars. So for them, life does mean life. Mr. Terr commented that Hardy did not accept his guilt nor show remorse for his crimes, and that life should mean life for him. Hardy was linked to another crime, the murder of Dorothy Leyden in April of 1971. Leyden had been raped and beaten to death before being dumped behind a pub on Rochdale Road in Collyhurst. Many in the community believed that Hardy was the likely mastermind behind this. However, in 2008 it was proven by DNA evidence that Hardy was not her killer. Leyden's case still remains unsolved. Life did mean life for Trevor Hardy, as on September 23, 2017, he suffered a heart attack which subsequently caused his death 2 days later in hospital. Trevor Hardy passed away aged 67 and is one of Britain's longest-serving criminals. Ralph Mosoff, the father of Sharon, had this to say to the Manchester Evening News, quote, "Me and my family think this is the best thing that has ever happened to us. It's like winning the lottery. We've had a big party to celebrate his death. We feel as though a burden has been lifted from our shoulders, knowing that he cannot come out and do anything to anybody else. We knew he was inside, but you cannot forget something like that. It preys on your mind. What he did was cold-blooded murder. He was an animal." Hardy's death may have been a celebration for the Mosoffs and other victims' families. However, his death does not take away the pain and suffering felt by them or the impact on the community. So thanks for tuning in to this week's video. I'm actually recording this on the 12th of July, which actually happens to be my 23rd birthday, so happy birthday to me. I made it to 23, so that's always good. This case is very interesting and very near and dear to me, obviously ever since moving to Manchester 5 years ago. Sort of started looking into true crime a lot more, especially after I came here because I did my degree in forensic science and criminology, so obviously I had to delve into Manchester's history, and I came across this case, which surprisingly a lot of people don't know about, and I really wanted to highlight that. and I really wanted to highlight the Leyden case, which I'm going to be looking into and sort of doing a video on soon on my channel, because her case is still unsolved, and I believe that no case is unsolvable. It just takes sort of the right techniques, police work, and the right person to come forward. So, thank you for watching. If you liked it, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe. We're going for 200 now, we reached 100. Also want to say thank you for 100. And remember, stay safe and stay spooky.